Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second broadcast of the FAIR Dialogue, presented to you by the FAIR Project, which has been organized by 8 Goals, 1 Foundation and supported by the UNESCO New Delhi Cluster Office. While this is our second dialogue, it is the first since we took the decision to move the residential program of the FAIR Project online, and therefore, this sets the stage for many more dialogues more frequently over the next few months. While the decision to take the FAIR project online was a difficult decision for all of us, it has also provided us with an opportunity to bring these dialogues to a much larger audience, both live and once they're up on YouTube. The culmination of this season's FAIR dialogues will be in November, where the 32 changemakers of the FAIR project will present their views to all of you on matters relating to world change and policy. For the here and the now, we're very excited because we have a very special guest with us today, who I'm personally very eager to have a conversation with. It's funny how we try and find reason in everything that we experience in our lives. 11 years ago, I crossed this gentleman's house and was introduced to his work for the very first time in a very fleeting moment. Today, 11 years down the line, having forgotten that moment for the longest time, I've got an opportunity to speak with him on all of your behalf to try and understand all the things that I found fascinating about him in that fleeting moment. Mr. Krishnendu Bose, Krish, is a national award-winning filmmaker, which I'm sure that all of you watching this video are aware of. But more than that, he's a man with thoughts that, at least in my opinion, are clearer and closer to their genesis than most other people. His latest series, Heroes of the Wild Frontiers, captures the realism of the forest guards who have redefined the term call of duty to mean not just the duty for which they are remunerated for, but the duty that they owe to themselves, their environment, and the planet. This isn't the first time that Mr. Bose, Krish, has captured the traits that define humanity through what would otherwise be mistaken for an exceptional work of art, which it is, don't get me wrong. It's by itself, the fact that it's an exceptional work of art is highly commendable. However, when looked at through the nuanced eyes of Krish, these exceptional works of art take on a whole new meaning for themselves. In his documentary, Missing the Forgotten Women in India's Climate Plans, he brings forth the value that rural Indian women can provide when planning for climate change, given that it is they who are closest to seeing it and feeling every minute difference for themselves. In The Tiger Who Crossed the Line, he speaks of physical boundaries created by us around a tiger's home, which to the tiger is merely a part of the terrain. And how some of us live in close harmony with the tigers, others create disharmony from far away. In Harvesting Hunger, he takes us on a journey across Punjab, Warangal, Kalahandi, and Bellary to show us what our neo-human tendencies have done to not just agriculture, but eventually our very existence. I could go on and tell you more about what I think of his work, but I think what all of them have in common, and not just them, but all his other films as well, is using his art to show us a mirror. And this part is really important. To bring us closer to reality, to help us understand the facts behind our assumptions, and at times, the facts behind our ignorance. Our conversations with Krish today are just a continuation of our effort towards bringing forth different ways of thinking that can help all of us assess the decision that we are faced with through multiple lenses and therefore help us make better and fairer decisions. Welcome, Krish. We are glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Ramit.
Thank you. But before we start you off, I just want to make a quick few points to everyone who's tuned in to the broadcast today. The way that we'll structure this conversation is that we'll first have Krish make his introductory remarks, following which we've saved up a bulk of today's time for answering questions that all of you may have for him. I must also thank all of you who have sent in questions in advance. We will try our best to address most of them in one way or the other. Please feel free to continue to ask any questions that may come to your mind by typing into the chat box on the right-hand side of this screen. As always, for those of you who are familiar with the FAIR project, More than anything else, feel free to be vocal about anything that you hear and disagree with. Finally, we hope that these 60 minutes will benefit you in some way or the other, however big or small. With that, it's over to you, Mr. Bose, to take things forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramit. Well, I'm thank you, Ramit, and thank you, FAIR Project, and I'm really excited to be here this evening and also to talk to young people. I think young people, in my experience, have always brought in a lot of new ideas, a lot of dissent, and a lot of disagreement, which I find very exciting, and it kind of pushes your boundaries and makes you think. So I'm excited for this evening's conversation. So you asked me to begin this whole session by my opening statements on fairness and justice. Well, these are very big words, and the definitions of these words, I suppose all of us know. We probably have studied in fourth grade in our civics books. So everybody knows there are some guiding principles of human values. I think those are the guiding principles which also form our constitutions all across the world. And so, I mean, fairness is something I don't think we should I should redefine. But however, I may like to talk about the way I look at justice and being fair, the markers, the parameters I would look at, or I have looked at through my films, through my experience as a filmmaker of conservation environment conversations. I feel in especially the Indian context, and I suppose this is specific and this is important to mention the Indian context, because I suppose in this whole conversation in the next 60 minutes, we will talk about the Indian context as a special context in the world. So for me, I would go back to what Gandhiji had said, that if the last person, the poorest person, he or she is affected positively by your act or by your policies, then it's fair and then it's just. Now, this is something, maybe in India, we've been hearing this for all our lives, and this becomes a very trite comment. But I have seen that when in my travels, in my experience, how injustice is actually done when that whole lot of people are kind of thrown out of the grid of development, of benefits, and they are not in their participation in the nation building is kind of locked out. In various ways we think and the way we act and practice. So for me, that has been the kind of one guiding principle which I have followed in my filmmaking, in my understanding of the ground realities, and it's really benefited me that those voices, if I can even hear those voices and then try and learn, try and experience that part of the debate, which probably never gets on board, never gets to the table. And then if I can document it and somehow if I can bring it in my film and then, have a larger debate, that's been my endeavor and that's been my journey and challenge all through my life. So I don't know whether it answers your question, but that's what I feel I wanted to say right in the beginning. Ramit.
Krish, I think it does to a large part set the tone for this conversation over the next hour, because and it's so wonderful to have conversations with people like you, right? And especially from where we're coming from, because what you said right there, right, in terms of looking at it from the lens of other people, right? It's in our vision. It's in the vision of the 8 Goals 1 Foundation, where we're repeatedly saying that we're focusing on what is right for all and not just what benefits the few. Unfortunately, and I'm sure there'll be stories to tell as we move forward. The fact is that there are too many people in our world today who are in a position of power who fail to see what you just said right now, and it's something that's always bothered me. And where I come from, and maybe you can shed some light on it as well, is that Right in the beginning, I said that it's giving facts to our lack of understanding and giving facts to our ignorance. One of the two is invariably true when people try and find reasons to ignore the larger objective, the larger set of people, the entire other side that you mentioned very rightly that gets missed out on. Having been on the ground and having actually been lived with people, lived with everyone, that has helped you see the other side also, right? Do you really believe that is that the only way in which people can do that? Because did you always, even before you went and lived with those people, shot with them and so on and so forth, did you already have a sense that this is the kind of mind frame that you had, or did your mind frame evolve as you spent time with them?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question for me personally, because see, I've been in this business, in this practice for 30 years, right? So when I was like 26, 27, I was just breaking my teeth in filmmaking, and I wanted to do wildlife. Now, that's the most sexy thing to do, by the way, even now. So when you ask young people, and they would say, I would like to do wildlife, tigers. Oh, you do tigers, can I come along with you, can I hold your tripod and stuff like that? So I was also like stars in my eyes, and all the things we are fed with are the same as we are fed with today. The international channels which show these beautiful movies about wildlife. So my first film was actually on the elephant. There's a project elephant in India, still there, still is now. So we did a whole film. I was commissioned this film by the Ministry of Environment, and it was a fantastic experience. My first experience, me and my wife, both of us, we went across the country, and we filmed elephants, and it was a pure, as they say, blue chip. Like, there's a term in wildlife films. It's called blue chip, which is just animals, largely animals, just animals, beautiful shots, etc. Of course, my films are nowhere as compared to the others on the international channel, but that's what I made, and I really wanted to do all my life. And then after a few years, I got into the rough and tumble of conservation, and there was a film I made after a few years, which is called "There's a Fire in Your Forest." And though I was a part of conservation movement, there was a student group which matured into a bigger group called Kalpuriksh. I was a part of that. So my notions of environment conservation, people's movements, people's rights were forming, but I hadn't really sort of experienced it firsthand. And then I made a film called "There's a Fire in the Forest," and that kind of really opened my mind, my heart, my eyes. It was a film. Historically, it was documenting something very important, very critical, which happened in our country, which very few people know. In 1972, the Wildlife Act came in because Indira Gandhi, then Prime Minister, she decided that tigers were really in a very precarious situation, and WWF pushed India to do something about the tigers. And then in 1972, this act came, and it immediately formed 9 tiger reserves across the country. And then, it developed. Today, there are many, many more. There are about 50 tiger reserves, or probably more. So, but how do you form a tiger reserve? How do you form a kind of a park, a reserve? That concept of reserve, we had, till then, we had Maharajas having their own hunting reserves and things like that. But in an indigenous context, that reserve, a tiger reserve, how do you do it? So we just imported a model from the West, from US. They had this big Yellowstone National Park and several other parks. So we just imported that model, which said that there will be a kind of fence, there will be a border, and in there, it will be inviolate for animals and just for animals. And if there are people inside, then they have to be moved out. And you have to understand, we are talking about people who are indigenous people. These are forests. So you're talking about Adivasis who've been living there maybe since the tigers were there. And they are the real protectors of the forest. You have this forest to preserve and protect, because the original people living in there have protected it. They haven't broken it down. They haven't torn it apart. but they had to move. And so it was very intriguing for me that, why don't I just go and talk to them? The people who have moved, this is like 1999, I'm talking about, and this has happened in 75. So I'm talking about like 25 years. So after that, I tracked them. And some of them, we tracked them, and they were Gond Adivasis, they were Baga Adivasis, and they told their stories, which was mind blowing, and how they were moved. And then one thought that all the repository of knowledge they had over 500 years, 2000 years, it's all gone. In one stroke of a signature, it's all gone. And in the film, if you happen to see, or if anyone wants to see it, it's on our website, earthcarefilms.com. We do talk about, I mean, they do talk about their knowledge and their experience of being moved out. And so my whole intrigue was that, so what happens to conservation? Are we poorer? We are richer in tigers, we are richer in protection, possibly. But are we poorer in our knowledge, in our experience, in the experience of these people? So that sort of started my journey into looking beyond the tiger, looking, beyond what you see. Even today, when young people or all of us go into a national park, say Kana, Ranthambore, Tadoba, to see tigers, do we even realize that what was it 100 years ago in this place, and who were the original protectors? So thereby my journey started, and I learned on the way.
Yeah, no, there's so many thoughts that are coming to my mind as I hear that, right? And one of those thoughts is actually related to a question that one of our viewers had sent in over email, and absolutely directly related to what you're saying. And what Rituparna asked, Rituparna Palit, and she asked the question that, when you're talking about tribals, right, and you just spoke in great length about them, there is this set of different views about them, right? One side, people think that tribals are the protectors of the environment. They know exactly what they're doing, and so on and so forth. They help in the conservation of forests. They've been doing it, as you mentioned very rightly, for all these years, before the act came about, and then even across the world before many other measures came about. But the other side ends up speaking about, and you see it very recently, even right now in the Andamans, we have heard of what was happening there, and so on and so forth, that there is this set that feel that there's a need to civilize the tribals, right? What are your, and clearly, and I get a sense of what your thoughts on this are, but between this debate of trying to provide them with modern medicine, try to provide them with the modern equipment that can make their lives easier, civilize them, as people like to call it, versus the fact that they've been living in that manner, in the way they are, perhaps better than us in many ways, for centuries and even longer. Between those two line of thoughts, and what do you really feel? Where does the debate really lie?
Well, this is a very large question, very deep question, very political question. So, I mean, where do I even start? So what you're asking is that on one side, there is this debate that Adivasis they are the original settlers and they are the real protectors. On the other side is that we need to go and actually civilize them. I don't even understand what is the word civilization. I'm civilized. What does it even mean? When in Delhi, people overtake each other and then they park their car in front of the other, get down and start bashing him up. So is that being civilized? I don't know. So if education and going in cars and having, living in fancy houses is being civilized, I don't know. I don't know that. So first we need to even understand what is the word civilization. I mean, being civilized really means. I feel in my limited experience with not just the indigenous people, but people in the rural areas, my experience has been a lot with people who live in and around tiger reserves, in national parks, or in forests, just forests. I feel they are much more civilized than we are. and I have no doubt about it. I mean, it's not a form of debate which I'm trying to put forward my thoughts on these lines, but they are much more civilized. Because for me, being civilized is one of the definition I would consider is to know yourself, who you are in relation to the world around you. So if you are a human and there is this world around you which is natural world, then what is your relationship with that natural world? And for me, this is a very, very critical question I need to ask myself, and I need to define this relationship. And from there could be some definition or idea or perception of being civilized. This is the way I would look at it. And by any stretch of imagination, if you look at the world we live in, if that is the way you can, one of the definitions of being civilized is, I certainly think we are not civilized. We as in all of us, and they as in what we're talking about, people who live on ground, and as compared to them, we are certainly not civilized. So what are we? I mean, even to begin this debate and discussion, it's a non-starter, right? Their sense of medicine, for instance, their sense of the way their societies are formed, the way they live in terms of harmony, the way they use natural resources. I mean, anything you just list it out, and anything they do. But we need to be realistic. You need to put this model in today's context, and see that not everything is hunky-dory, not everything is romantic. This could be constituted as a romantic idea of people living on ground and close to forest. Well, commercialization, development, markets, all of that has seeped in to that space as well. So there is a lot of commercialization, there's a lot of destruction, there's a lot of abuse of nature. Of course, that does happen. But then if you look at us, and again, I'm smiling. You know why I'm smiling. If you bring all those parameters to us, then there is no debate. You can't even start a discussion. How we have, and today we are sitting in the middle of pandemic, and I don't have to say anything else. And it clearly comes out from how we have treated the world around ourselves, and it's just not nature. It's, as we know, it's human beings, and we are one polarized, one broken up world. So even if you compare their commercialization and the way markets have made inroads and development has made inroads, then they are more civilized than we are, way more. And this is what we needed to recognize. We haven't recognized that in the last 75 years, we being an independent country. We haven't recognized that, because if we had, then I wanted to see some of them sitting on planning commission meetings, some of them sitting today in the Niti Aayog members, or any webinars now, or any seminars, or any place. Their voice is not there, their representation is also not there, they're not there. So that's why we feel that we are more civilized, we know how to run this world, we are more educated. So I mean, to conclude this debate for me is a non-starter.
Yeah, Krish, I think that's really what the sad part is in our world today, right? And when you mentioned about the pandemic, today it's because of commerce, what we've always been so proud of, our commerce, our GDP, our economy, and so on and so forth. It's because of that everyone's being sent into work. It's because of the commerce, and because commerce is being placed first, we're all having these conversations about opening up, unlock, and so on and so forth, when things are just getting worse day by day. But yet, because commerce unfortunately comes first, we supposedly think that we don't have a choice. Whereas, frankly, if you look at areas where commerce does not come first, there is, of course, a choice, right? We sitting in our urban cities do not have that choice. So again, right from where you said, right, what is civilization? Who do you call civilized, and so on and so forth? I think the answer just lies very, very simply in one of the very first things that you said as part of this answer, that it's always in context with your environment, right? And that environment could be an urban environment, it could be a forest environment, it could be a rural environment, whatever that environment may be. And in connection with that environment, you will live your life in the way that is best for you to live your life. And any imposition on that, frankly, at least from my perspective, and I can say it out loud, I think is extremely uncalled for, and frankly, something that big words can justify, but reason and rational can never justify. But anyway, we do have to move on to the next part, because we can go on and on just about this, but I'm sure that the viewers want to know your thoughts on a lot more else. I can see Rupesh's comment here on the screen, and he's happy to share with us that he lives in Tadoba, in the Tadoba area, and tigers many a times enter the village in Tadoba where he lives, right? And that also takes us to another question that we were sent in by Janvi Sarangi, who said, and who wanted to ask you that, just as what Rupesh is saying right now on chat, that in recent times we have seen how tigers and leopards have been spotted in residential areas. More so, there have been several cases where men have been hunted down by tigers, right? Now, we all know that tigers are not man-eaters innately, is what she says. In your opinion, what has caused this behavioral change? And if I were to add to that question, is it even a behavioral change, or is it the circumstance at that point that leads a tiger to then thereafter move in the direction where they become dangerous to human beings, right? Because the dialogue really is that, at least what a lot of people would like us to believe is that once tigers are near habitation and human habitation, it's a given that now they turn towards becoming man-eaters and so on and so forth, right? But what are your thoughts in this entire construct?
Okay, right in the beginning, I would like to say is that this man-eating thing is a very romantic myth. We don't even know what man-eating means, because man-eating doesn't mean that a tiger goes and eats a man or a woman. So it's not that. What we possibly mean, which I mean, one of the first person to actually define man-eaters was Cobbett, of course. So a man-eater, a tiger, is habitual man-eater. Like the tiger would seek out a human being, go kill it, and eat it up like a prey. So this is something we all need to understand. Like a tiger would go and eat a deer in the forest, it will go to human habitation, pick up a human, sit there like he watches a deer. The movement every day, what's happening in the evening, he comes back home in a village situation, he goes out early morning, and then he goes and does his work. And this is the time I'm going to kill him and eat him. So what we are talking about is tigers straying out. These are very important words. Tigers straying out from the forest. And what does the tiger see? In front of him is a village, is a human habitation. So it still goes through. Most of the time it's trying to go through that village and trying to find another forest. Because for whatever reason, there's some behavioral or technical reasons, let me put it this way, that the tiger has to find new territories, right? So it is using that village as a corridor to get through to the next one. Now, it happens to encounter a human, and it gets as surprised and shocked and scared as the human, and it attacks and possibly kills, but most of the time doesn't eat. In fact, probably 90% of the time doesn't eat. It just kills out of self-defense most of the time, and then goes across. Or possibly it goes inside the village to find a cattle, a goat, and that is its prey. So human comes in his path, in its path and then gets killed. So we need to first understand that. And then secondly, the larger question that why is it happening now in India? As my friend just said, that in Tadoba, it's happening a lot. So why is it happening? Why is it increasing? Now, as you, Ramit, had talked about our film called The Tiger Who Crossed the Line, we did tackle this whole, or we did discuss this whole issue of conflict, human-wildlife conflict, and especially with tigers. Its film was all about tigers. The tiger who crossed the line would actually mean the tiger who goes out of the forest. Why do tigers even go out of the forest? That's their home. So why would they? I mean, they are very intelligent creatures. All animals are at some levels, and tigers are very, very intelligent creatures. So why would they go out and make themselves vulnerable by going into a human habitation? You should remember, wild animals would always avoid human beings, always. So they would go for various reasons. But now what has happened is that it's interesting that, we did a wonderful job of conservation of tigers, especially tigers. In the last 10, 15 years also, our count has gone up to almost touching 4,000 tigers. And it was down to 1,700, 1,600 tigers about 10, 15 years ago. So we've done a wonderful job of conservation to bring back the tiger. The policing has been excellent. The poaching has gone down hugely. So the borders are locked. Management has been excellent. But there's a flip side to it. It's interesting that tigers, like a glass of water, they have a carrying capacity. A forest has a carrying capacity for tigers. So one forest, say Tadoba, for instance, is a good example because we've also filmed there, and I know a little bit about Tadoba. That forest, Tadoba, is a small forest as compared to Kana or Corbett. Now that can carry about 50, 55 tigers. A carrying capacity would mean that it has that much prey for 50, 55 tigers to survive in that forest, right? And I'm talking about Tadoba, which is one of the best tiger parks in the country. It's fantastically managed, it's protected. So it can sustain about 50, 55 tigers. Okay. Now, tigers are like cats. They are cats, and they breed prolifically. If you safeguard them, if you tell them, boss, your house is secured, now go and have fun. So it'll have huge litters, and the population can rise. So population started rising. In the last 10 years, it started rising. So 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85 tigers. Oh my God. Now what does this 30 tigers do? Because they can't live in there. So they troop out, and they go out and they get into conflict. They kill cattle, they get killed, and they try to find new territories because they can't go back. So there's a buffer in Tadoba, which probably has 10, 15 tigers. So that is absorbed. But the other 20, 30 tigers, there are actually 60 tigers outside, by the way. Inside Tadoba, there are 55 tigers. I don't know the latest count as of today, but roughly there are about 50, 55, 60 tigers inside and about 60 tigers outside. So it's a very peculiar situation. And this has come about for two reasons. One, I told you, it's a flip side of conservation. The other is that when the tiger used to go out, then there were corridors connecting one forest to the other, right? And tigers always try to find new territories because there's the tiger has a unique territory, and a new male comes in, it pushes us out. So there's a ecological tiger dynamics. And so it used that corridor, which was forested corridor, and you find another space in another forest close by, say 20 kilometers, 40 kilometers. And it's to travel by night and get there and see that dynamics of that space and try and find new territory. But those corridors are gone, or they're going very fast. Development, roads, railway lines, dams, whatever. Even human population is increasing. So there is a push of villages and of small towns, and corridors are useless. So when you make a policy, when you sign on various things, there are they have some definition of forest. So it's a national park, tiger reserve, sanctuary, etc. So the corridor doesn't fall into these main big star, Ajay Devgan and Amitabh Bachchan and all these things. They are small actors, so they can be just pushed aside, and then they say, okay, you can extend your town there, you can extend your railway line there. So the tiger, poor guy, poor chap, comes out, and then he can't find a forest. So then that whole dynamics happen, and he or she meets a villager, and then so I suppose now I've tried to explain this whole dynamic. And the last thing I want to say is that this is going to be the number one conservation problem in the country, which probably it is already. Human wildlife conflict is going to explode in this country, and because nothing is changing, the animal numbers are going up because our conservation is fantastic, people development, everything is going that way, and the tigers are coming that way. So the clash and the conflict is inevitable. Our policies, and we are trying to mitigate this conflict. There are groups, there are government policies, but this is my personal opinion, the way it is rising and the way we are trying to mitigate it with our policies, I mean, those two rates are very different. So just a last word, that this is going to be, so keep an eye, my friend, in Tadoba. Things might be pretty bad in the coming.
I think, Krish, this whole, and I actually call it a dichotomy, right? That we keep talking about animals intruding upon our territory, right? And that's actually what people end up saying a lot. I remember growing up in Vasant Vihar in Delhi, and we had the Aravallis right behind us where we lived, right? And when I was a kid back in the late 80s, early 90s, we'd walk into that Aravalli foothill area that is there in Vasant Vihar, and we even had crocodiles there. There was a lake where we had a crocodile, right? Snakes were all over the place. When we used to play cricket, even in our colonies, there used to be snakes in the bushes, and we'd always first try and hunt for the ball with the bat, and then pick it up and play. But we wouldn't stop us from playing, right? It wouldn't be something that impacts the way that we live, because we were brought up over there in that manner, along with whatever limited wildlife as one can speak of in an urban area. And then, of course, you look at villages that are closer to forests and so on and so forth, who have also, as we mentioned previously, been living with the wildlife for all these years and centuries and so on and so forth. And that's where this whole concept of intrusion really is something that goes beyond me, right? I think it is maybe, again, it may be romanticizing the whole concept, but I think living in harmony is crucial and critical. We need to recognize the genus of any such intrusion, right? And I'm sorry, I'm just going to give you one more example, and to everyone over here as well. One of my colleagues, in fact, one of the individuals who co-founded H1 with me, Varun, he was in the Northeast, and he was crossing a very newly made road in the Northeast. I think it was in Mizoram, right? And while driving, they suddenly saw a couple of vipers crossing the road from far behind, because they were that bright and it was very easily visible. And they just stopped. Now, there are two ways of looking at that situation, right? One is that, oh God, what is a viper doing on a main road, right? But those who he was with effectively, and their answer was simple. There was no road till a year back. This is where they were. This is where they lived. This is what they did, right? This was their area. We've created a road in the middle, and they don't know whether the road existed or something has happened or the terrain has changed and so on and so forth. And that's where the origin really is. That did we intrude? Did we end up doing something that has called them out? And we've seen so many such cases of, construction. Because of construction, a lot of snakes coming out in hordes in the construction sites and so on and so forth, because we're the ones who disturbed their natural habitat, or where they were living in the first place. So, and just taking it back to what Rupesh was saying and what Janvi had asked, I think at the end of the day, tigers, from my perspective, and all that I've heard from you, for them, it's business as usual. For them, it is what they do. For them, it is their life and how they lead it. Now, if there is a village in the middle, or a road in the middle, or whatever it may be, it's something that they need to cross, because they're moving towards their next habitat. So, I think it resonates with me absolutely. I can see a few more questions in chat, and I'm going to try and link those in together because they're all fairly similar, and they all effectively tie in towards what I spoke of in terms of commerce driving a lot of what we do, and policies, and the government making those policies based on commerce and so on and so forth. Amisha speaks about rehabilitation of Adivasis, which comes as a consequence of some sort of development taking place in their areas. Ayush is talking about the contradictory environmental stand that the Indian government has taken, where you're diluting laws like environment on the one hand, and then of course talking about conserving the environment on the other hand. Arham also on chat speaks about coal extraction and how that's led to the displacement of Adivasis. On email, we had received a question from Janvi, where she basically spoke about the fact that you're looking at the Dibang Valley project, the Hubali Ankola project, all of these projects in the last 1.5 months while we've been battling Corona, that has just been fast-tracked by the government, because this is perhaps, they feel that the right time to be going ahead with all of these projects, right? How do we, all of us on this conversation right now, I think all of us feel strongly about this. All of us feel strongly about the fact that we need to do something to make sure that the consequence that you spoke of, doesn't happen. And then we can actually conserve our environment in the best way that we can. But at the same time, having to deal with these kind of decisions, these kind of moves by either commercial establishments or governments, what do we do? What can all of us, each one of us individually do to try and do something about it when we perhaps can't rely on our government understanding, either for ignorance or a lack of facts or whatever the reason may be, right? And we can debate about that all day, but how do we try and get our word out there and make a difference, right? You've been doing it with all your videos, but for all of us, it'll be great to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, there are a lot of questions here, and I'll try and share my thoughts on this. These are questions, I think, for me at least, they're very fundamental to understand environment. And again, as I said right in the beginning, who am I and what's my relationship with environment, world around me. Now, first of all, even the last conversation we were having about you sharing your experience, your growing up experience in Vasant Kunj. Actually, I should just finish that and then get into this. I had a little thought in my mind. Something I wanted to share was that we actually made a film in, I think, 2007 about Delhi and how it is growing and things like that. So we had actually filmed 2006, yeah, for 7. We had actually filmed how the malls were coming up, their construction. Over 6 months, we've seen some of the malls actually being constructed. And then when the malls were constructed and everything, they were in action and everything was happening, the water table went down. The water availability went down. So I was in Vasant Valley School once and showing some films and chatting with the kids there. And this was much later after the malls came up. And so I said, do you make a connection between malls coming up and water table going down and the scarcity of water in the summers in Vasant Kunj in a huge way? So they understood the connection. So connection is very simple. We can see that. So you have to make a choice whether I want to live with 4 months of water scarcity, or I want to go, to the mall and have a fancy. My point is, so I'm coming to the next very critical, fundamental point, which which is the whole environment debate, especially from people like us, who are taking this debate in a public sort of space. And we are talking about how destruction of environment happens, and it's terrible. The pollution, the water, the animals, the forest going, right? On the other hand, is our consumption, our lifestyles, the way we are making inroads into the forest, the population is expanding and exploding. So there is this clash. Now, so what are the solutions? The solution is that we should drastically control our lifestyles, and this should happen. And so only by that we can protect. So what I'm trying to understand is that we have already made a huge polarized binary between the two. So if you want to save the forest and the environment and have a clean air, then you have to really drastically reduce your lifestyle and basically don't use cell phones, don't use this, don't use ACs, don't use that. So all this has made us wonder that oh my God, so if I have to get clean water in Delhi and air, then I have to stop using my car, I have to stop doing this. And so obviously that's not possible. It's nice to say that, make a movie about it, but it's not possible. So let me live with this kind of air and what to do. Because we've portrayed this binary in such a polarized, such a stringent, such a difficult choices that we end up doing nothing. My point is that populations will grow. Today we are doing, I'm using a computer, my AC on here, and we are using technology, and I'm chatting with a whole lot of people out there. So there is, these are inevitable. Let's not give value to it as wrong or right. They're inevitable. There's a certain amount of development, growth, economic growth, which is desirable and inevitable. Now the thing is, the idea I feel is that within that, how can you be more sensitive, have policies which are very strict, and then see the best way to impact environment? Because there's some amount of pollution, some amount of forest destruction is bound to happen. You cannot lock it. If you're having development like what you're saying, that the numbers of pandemic infection is going to increase if you have economic activity. But how long can you just lock down? The whole world can't be locked down for 3 years, right? So now you have to balance it out. So similarly, you have to balance this out, and that balance has been not happening. That balance is locked out. And the reason may be this. So when we see the Dibang Valley going up in flames, when we see a whole forest, vanishing, and then we are so shocked, but we cannot make a change in our lifestyle because we have been told we have to switch off your AC and not go in the car, walk, take a cycle. So what I'm saying is that we should respect, right in the beginning what I said, that you go back to the real civilized people, you learn from them, get them on the table, try to understand, try to build your policies around what you have learned. Be sensitive to people and environment, and you don't have to close shop. You don't have to close shop of development. We need power. We need all these things. And in a long term, you can say that, okay, can we reduce our water consumption? Can you reduce? Of course we should. So those are the little things. If we all of us do, then the impact on forest. Do we need that dam in Dibang Valley? Who's benefiting from the dam? Years ago, 20, 30 years ago, when I started making films, then there was a huge debate about Terry Dam in Terry, which would inundate a whole lot of people and villages, and the power was coming to Delhi. So now this is about justice and fairness. That with Gandhiji's philosophy, there is another sort of maxim I always try and look that who's paying the cost and who's reaping the benefits. It's a very easy equation. When the Dibang Valley inundates huge tracts of forest, villages, a whole lot of people are wiped out, almost civilizations are wiped out. Do they get power? Do they get benefited out of that dam? The answer is, in 90% of the cases, no. So they are paying for the power people like us enjoy. So that's completely unfair, it's unjust. So at least give them the choice, saying that you have to give up this to enjoy this. That's a fair sort of equation you're putting out, and let them decide. So what I'm trying to say is that, to conclude this, that we need to understand the binary which has been created is actually for business as usual to go. The forest environment should be destroyed, and we should live the life we are leading and living till there is a point where it cannot just go on, which is pandemic. It just can't go on. So it clashes and it stops. But my fear is that things are not going to stop after we are in a post-pandemic situation. The lessons learned are not going to be very deep. And as one of my young friends said out there, if you just look at the last 4 months and see the projects which have been cleared, and a lot of them are very sensitive projects, and not just last 3-4 months, but if you see the last 6 years, there have been about 2,500 projects which were put up, and about 2,300 or so, 87% of the projects were cleared. And out of that, 350 projects are very close to forests and protected areas like national parks and sanctuaries. So things are happening. And we feel that we are disempowered to do anything, and we can just sign on change.org petitions, and that's all we can do. But that's not true. We can do a lot, but the thing is that, do we want to, first of all, know what's going on? I think that's the first step. We don't even know what's going on. The people on the other side who I'm talking to, they may be more concerned, more conscious people. They may be going out of their way and trying to figure out what's going on around them, but not everybody is. Though, however, I should quickly say this, that the EIA, as you have said, is being diluted. There's a whole lot of efforts going on. The draft EIA is out, and soon, it will be a new law and things like that. But the universities, I think 11 universities and young people have come forward and protested, and they've written their protest letters to the powers that be. So that's a very heartening thing for me and all of us. I think that's very heartening, because eventually it's that generation which is going to live this life. I mean, we are like on the last tea time in cricket. So we have struggled, we have tried to do whatever. In fact, we have also part of the destruction mode. So the young people should really out there go, and you have a lot of power. We have seen that in the last couple of years in India. We have seen that. So use that power of information. Just go out there, dig information, protest. You are citizens, you are very important citizens, and the future decision makers. So I think things are, my big hope is towards our millennial generation.
Now, Krish, I think all that you've said, and that's what I think drives everyone at the FAIR project, and everyone who's tuned in right now, myself, our entire team, every single day, right? This is really what drives us. Is it's okay to be called an activist, and that's something that I've realized over years of doing different things, right? When you start talking a lot, and especially when you're in urban India and you're talking a lot about environment or farmer issues or whatever else that you're talking about, you end up getting branded as an activist, and people start getting bored after a point of time, right? You talk to them once, you'll talk to them twice. By the third time, they'll be like, "Ki, "Arey yaar, kisi aur cheez ke baare mein baat kar. Let's talk about something else," right? And that's really, and I know you've answered this in great detail, but I do want to maybe perhaps dive a bit deeper into this entire challenge, right? All of us, of course, need to do what we can, and you're absolutely right. And that's what I keep saying, that it's, what jo kehte hain, boond boond se samandar banta hai. It's about that. Every single effort that we make, however small it may be, it may seem to us, it's adding to the bigger picture, because there's a voice that's getting magnified because of everything that we say, we put out there, we talk to people, and so on and so forth. And at some point in time, we have to believe that it will make a difference, and that's what really keeps us going. Unfortunately, though, what also happens with a lot of young adults, right? And I'm saying it out in the open. There's a lot of talk, right? As right in the beginning, you had mentioned that it's a glamorous thing to get into wildlife photography or doing something with the environment. It's a very fascinating field to get into. Similarly, talking about these issues and so on and so forth has also become something that young adults end up doing a lot of, right? But in terms of actual action, there is this large set which does not take that action, right? And what ends up happening, unfortunately, and this is something that Radhika had sent over to us on email as well, is that while the urban youth talks, the rural youth actually experiences, right? And of course, you've been in rural India, you've been in the forests, and do you see that distinction? And again, I asked this earlier as well, and I'm sorry I'm repeating this, but I do want to see if you can shed more light into this, is that those experiences of living in the forest, those experiences of living in rural India, do they add to their value? Do we need to listen to them more? Do we need to listen to the young adults and the youth in these areas more than what we're listening to the urban youth, right? And I consider myself as an urban youth as well. So I'm putting myself on the spot as well, right? Or is there a way to really balance the two out? Because the voice clearly of the urban youth, unfortunately, in one way or the other becomes louder, but then with the lack of action or without the lack of experience, uh, it may just end up being counterproductive. And feel free to disagree with me completely, and that's absolutely fine. But it is one of the fears that I do have.
I think it's a very relevant, very important question in today's times, especially with the times of social media, which gives us a lot of power, urban youth. Now, I wanted to share an experience which we do regularly. We have a not-for-profit organization called Earthcare Outreach, where there's a tool of filmmaking called participatory video, in which it's not a traditional filmmaking tool. You select or choose, or they get chosen by themselves, a bunch of people, and then they are not filmmakers. They are probably rural people, say for instance rural young adults, for instance, and you teach them filmmaking, the very rudimentary basic skills of filmmaking, of storytelling, of filmmaking. And then you hand over the cameras and you hand over the editing instruments and machines, and just inspire them, empower them to tell their stories on films, right? So it's a worldwide tool which has been used all across the world. In India also, there are some fantastic examples of that for the last 30, 40, 50 years. And we just borrowed that little tool, and we have been experimenting for the last 10 years. Now, when I started this as a part of some friends of ours and colleagues of ours got together and we made this non-profit organization. So when I started this, I had 20 years of filmmaking behind me, and I considered myself to be a student of cinema who knows a little bit about filmmaking, right? And so we went into this rural area with children who are like young adults, 15 to 18 years old, in deep down Adivasi villages of Madhya Pradesh, or in Sundarbans in West Bengal. And we started helping them to make their films, basically to tell their stories. And believe me, it was an eye-opener for me personally. I learned new ways to tell a story. I learned how to be humble enough to learn what environment is, what sustainability is, how people live their life sustainably in these areas, and such wonderful films got made. So, so what we are asking is that this whole rural-urban divide among young people. One thing I've learned in my life as a filmmaker, going out to the rural areas and eco-sensitive areas, if I would say that, environmentally rich areas, one thing I've learned is that to listen more than you talk. If you start listening to stories, to experiences, to the practice of people living there, I think that is a discipline. If you can imbibe that, then whatever you do, you can enrich your knowledge, you can enrich your experience. And then the way I see it, the way you said, that's one way of looking at it. But the way I see it, there's a lot of potential between this urban and the rural youth. I see it as a kind of partnership. If they bring in their experience from the rural areas, lived lives, lived experiences, and the urban youth can build this bridge and talk to the world with those stories, because they have certain amount of power which at this point of time the rural youth may not have, of reaching out to the world, making a difference in terms of their power, their knowledge, their networks. But they may not have that experience, right? So if you listen, if you are humble enough to go across. And a lot of us are privileged. We come from entitled privileged class, and if we even travel by a three-tier train and just go there, just go there, just go to Dibang Valley, just see for yourself. Don't read articles, don't listen to podcast. Just bunch of you just go there, and with your cell phone you can take pictures, you can take videos, and it's a learning experience. Just see for yourself what's going on, see how people live, see how they experience, what is their idea of sustainability, how will they be affected by this whole dam. I mean, one thing is reading in newspapers and our online newspapers and stuff like that, and one thing is going. So if you do that, if you make partnerships, if you build bridges, I think it can be a great combination of these two, and that is what I feel in the next 10 years we really need in this country. It can be explosive, where you make partnerships, you learn from them, and their voice is actually being carried to the rest of the world as a voice of change.
Yeah, no, Krish, I think that's, and it's just so true, right? If we are those with privilege, right, and as are many of those who are listening into this conversation right now, we're not alone. I think that's the one thing that we need to understand. It is something which can be done cohesively, which can be done together. And as what you said, why is there a divide? Why is there a debate? And I think that's really what my takeaway from what you said is that there is no debate. It's not about urban youth or rural youth. It's about getting them together and then seeing where we can head, because clearly there is, both have something different to offer to the overall narrative. And if we can combine that, yeah, to answer everyone, Ayush, Ishan, all of you, everyone who's speaking about governance and about change and so on and so forth. I think that's, and Krisha said it so beautifully, that it's that one superpower that all of us have as young adults, all of you have as young adults, that's yet not been unleashed, right? And the moment that that's unleashed, I think that's perhaps the kind of dramatic change that is required to get people to listen and get people to understand where we're coming from, where there is no excuse anymore. It's no excuse about, oh, you do not understand what it's like, so why should I listen to you? There's no excuse that the voice of those in rural India is not being heard, or what they have to say because they're suffering. And then, Ayush, you said it so rightly on chat right now, is that they act, but it's, at the end of the day, they're suffering, right? And to what extent can they reach out will always be a question. But if you marry the two, I think absolutely wonderful things can happen. So no, thank you so much for Krish, because that's, and from my perspective, I think it's a fantastic way to look at this entire bit, and which a way that I think everyone will find very useful, at least on this conversation right now. I know we've crossed the 1 hour mark, but I am going to try and keep you for a few minutes longer, because there are a few questions that I definitely want to get across to you. And Simon on chat has this question, which is. It's not just a question that he has for you, I think, in terms of your context, right? Where he asks you, what inspired you to take up this role, this profession that you have, in spite of not just doing a bachelor's in economics, but going ahead and doing your master's in economics as well, and then coming in and taking this up where, I don't know, and I don't want to speak for you, but definitely a lot of young adults that I find who want to follow their path, follow something along these lines, right? The trouble that they face is that it's not commercially viable for them to do so. It's difficult for the jobs in this sort of an area to get jobs in this area. It's difficult to get funding in areas such as this, and however attractive they may be, they're not the ones through which one can, at least in today's day and age, live their lives in an urban setting like this, right? Now, of course, when you took it up, it was decades ago, but I'm assuming that some of these realities were true then as well. But learning from your experience of how you got into this, I think would be very valuable for young adults trying to follow their passion and trying to do what they want to do, in spite of all the hiccups and hindrances that are there today. I think that'll be a lot of motivation for everyone, if you'd be happy to share.
Sure. Not that I have a lot of gyan to give. It's just my personal experience. And over the years, I've also asked myself this question sometimes, and people have asked me that, what had inspired you? What keeps you going? This is probably the time to retire. And I'm thinking of the next 10 years, what am I going to do? I have ideas every day. I have to control myself. I have to streamline. I can't just go everywhere. So it's very exciting, actually. But I think the major underpinning of my life as a communicator has been to find those stories which are not told, or the perspectives which are not seen, the voices which don't go out, which nobody has heard. And it is not a mission of my life to do this. No, I never set out as an agenda that this is what I want to follow and this is what my mission in life is. No, nothing of that sort. But when you research, when you talk to people, when you are looking for a new idea to make a film, then you realize that, well, suddenly you realize that, wow, this is very interesting. Never thought about it. Never looked at this issue in this particular way. And in fact, I have a feeling that nobody else has looked at it this way. So isn't it a very interesting way to tell the story from a very different perspective, from voices which people haven't heard? And who knows, you might get a whole new idea, a whole new perspective to look at this issue. Or maybe it's a problem, so look at a solution from a whole different set of perspectives. And that is what has intrigued me. And that is what always has pushed me to go and find that. And maybe make a film. Sometimes, you don't make a film. Because when you go out in the field to research a particular film, and you come back with a whole lot of ideas and a whole lot of perceptions and a whole lot of stories and experiences, but obviously you can't put that in one film. So it is also building you up as a human being, as a person, that you have these so many perspectives that eventually, if you ask me, like you asked me right in the beginning, that who is civilized? And I would say, oh my God, this is a very complicated question. 30 years ago, if you had asked me when I was in maybe school or college, or maybe 50 years ago, 40 years ago, then it's a very simple question. Come on, I mean, who's civilized? What is being civilized is all about? I mean, it's a very simple question. But when you have these perspectives and this kind of experience, then it becomes very confusing. So, for instance, this whole thing about tigers, for instance, I had made 3 films actually on tigers. The first film was called The Tiger, the Death Chronicles. This was made in 2006, 2005, 2006. 2005 in India, there was a massive upheaval in the world of the tiger and the world of conservation. 2 parks, tiger reserves, Sariska and Panna, which was 2 big tiger parks, very prestigious and very close to Delhi, Sariska, they were wiped out. All the tigers were killed. And suddenly they were without any tigers. There were about 30 tigers in each one of them, 20, 25, 30 tigers. So around 50 tigers were just wiped out. So there was a massive hue and cry, and their heads were rolling, and all the media was bang on. They were like tearing things apart. And suddenly I thought that, why did this happen? This is very interesting. Suddenly you have this 2 big parks, zero. How did it happen? So I did an investigative film, went right inside, looked at 30 years of conservation in India, the government, the forest department, and what's going on inside. And it came out to be not just the government and the forest department, but also people, conservationists, wildlifers, all of us. Who was responsible for this? And it came out to be a very interesting experience to make this film. I mean, that's another thing, that people liked it, and they said that, well, we didn't know most of it, what was happening, and it was an investigative film. So it brought in possibly a new perspective to what's going on. Then I made these 2 films, Forgotten Tigers and the Tiger Who Crossed the Line. It was 2 similar films. Now people started asking me when I said I'm making a film on tigers. They said, "Oh my God, another film on tigers! What new are you going to say?" I mean, everything about tigers have been said internationally, nationally. Everything has been done. Half the National Geographic Discovery channels are all about tigers. Come on, what are you going to say? But then what I ended up saying in these 2 films, I didn't see any other film till that point of time saying that. And in my humble opinion, it's not about me, but I was just very curious and very intrigued that how did people miss out on this? This is the most obvious thing. You see the tigers are crossing out and they are creating havoc outside. Why hasn't anybody made that kind of film? Because perhaps it's not sexy. It wasn't sexy to make this. It was getting your hands and feet dirty, getting into the politics of it, getting into the villages, and it's a very difficult film to make. I mean, you would ask me why. Why is it difficult film to make? It is indeed difficult because when you're going into Tadoba, you have the permissions, right? And you spend 50 days inside Tadoba with 50 tigers in 50 days. It's fantastic. You get amazing shots. I mean, there will be guides, there'll be wildlife experts. Even I would know as a conservation wildlife filmmaker where to sit in the summers, where to go in the winters, and get tigers, what kind of behavior you'll get. So it's easy to shoot that. Right now, if you go into a village, you don't know when when you'll get a tiger in that village. So the tiger movements are not known. So when will the tiger make its next skill in a village? Which village? When? How? You have no idea. So it was obviously a very difficult film to make. So we spent 1.5, 2 years in that film. Me and my colleagues, we went and placed cameras in if there was a cattle kill, we would place a camera on that. We'll train because we were in Delhi and something was happening in Tadoba. Right, so we obviously can't go back and forth. So we train people how to put that camera, how to make it happen, and then we'll get a phone call that the tiger came and it was eating the carcass, and possibly the camera was on and the batteries were charged. Possibly you may have got some interesting shots. So it's okay. Send the chip by courier, and then we would excitedly watch our computers, and then 3 out of 10 cases we'll get some shots. So it was very not a traditional way of making films. So I'm always very intrigued by these voices. So that's one part. The second part is that right up in very early in my life, I wanted to make documentaries, because documentaries is one thing where I meet people. I'll go to new areas and meet all kinds of people, interact with them, and people who you don't meet every day. And I've been very privileged and very lucky, I should say this, that I've had meals in people's houses. And sometimes being in India, you realize that they are offering me their last meal. And it's been a couple of times a very, very touch and go situation, because if you refuse, then they will feel that, urban, this Bada Saab has come and he doesn't want to eat with us. If you have that meal, then they're going to go hungry that evening. So those very touching moments I've experienced. And so I mean, it's a very fulfilling experience, I must say, in 30 years.
Krish, the one thing that I can say to you is you've lived your life, right? And you've lived and clearly a very, very curious life. And what was really prominent for me is when you were talking about all of this, the excitement levels, I could just see them going up in your voice as well. When you suddenly, you're transformed back to where you were there, and you're suddenly getting excited again. And Simon, that's really the answer to, Simon, what you asked and what you spoke of, because you can clearly see it in his eyes, right? You can clearly see the curiosity in his eyes and the excitement in his eyes even right now, right? And as he said, he's planning for the next 10 years. So clearly we are all going to be in for a great roller coaster ride with whatever he has for us going forward. Just on that, and still, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to keep you in for a little longer. 2 more questions, and then we can wrap for the day. One is a fun question, really, and it's actually on a lighter note. And Ayush asks it on a lighter note in the chat as well. Is that, and I'm going to give it my own twist in terms of Indian cinema now really going the environmental route, because you've called it sexy at least 3 times on this video right now. It's clearly going down the route that people are accessing this sort of content more. Are we going to see a time when Krishnendu Bose is going to be a director of a mainstream Hindi movie? I'm sorry, I had to ask a cheeky one right at the end.
Never. No mainstream cinema. Fiction, yes. In fact, I'm planning, I'm like thinking about one, ideating one, writing a script and things like that around this theme, possibly, but definitely not mainstream. My God, no. Not at all. I can cringe and die. I can commit harakiri, but not make a mainstream cinema. Maybe I'm not competent to make it. Maybe I don't have the skills to make it. I mean, nothing against mainstream cinema. I mean, that's another discussion. So, but suffice to say that I possibly don't have that temperament and that skill to make mainstream cinema. But
You're
no.
being very polite, and while you be polite, I can categorically say that it's far too commercial for someone like you to. And if commerce is driving what you do, your art will not be what it is. So, really, that's really all that I have to say on that. Okay, quickly before we leave, Krish, and you know that this is the last question that's coming up. You have mentioned it right in the beginning as well. You did speak of it, and I think it was quite enlightening that you did begin with your concept of fairness and justice, the way that you spoke of. But if you had to give us parting words about just your idea of fairness and what being fair really means, that would be great before we head out for the day.
Well, I mean, to encapsulate our conversation, when I started with Gandhiji, and I would perhaps end on the same note. Actually, I have nothing more to say, really. But I mean, this is an ideal world where everybody gets enough to eat, everybody has their rights in place, there is liberalism, all the voices are heard, there is guarantee of employment and life. And for that, I think for all these things to be realized, the simple answer is to have a very vibrant democracy. And I mean, that's the first thing you need to have. So you have to invest in a vibrant democracy. You have to be very careful that your democracy is safe, protected, and it's not fraying on the edges. The institutions in the democracy are strong, and they are like independent, and they have a voice. And unfortunately, across the world, we are seeing kind of a contrary signal. You're getting, I mean, you see all the strife which is happening. Old democracies are kind of shaking up a little bit. Maybe it's a phase. Maybe the phases of centralizing power, leaders are becoming larger than life. And maybe it's a phase, because it's not in one country. We are seeing across the world, and also we are seeing a lot of protests all across the world. Especially young people are coming out in protest. So people don't always are signing off on this. So for me, coming back to justice and fairness, your democracy has to be protected, and it's just a line. It's just a line. Democracy has to be protected. It has to be vibrant, but it is not easy. Over the years, you won't even know when your democracy under your very nose is compromised, and when you actually realize it, it's probably too late. So I have a lot of hope, and from young people, and especially when this audience mostly are young people. I think young people need to come out and realize and understand that across the world. And as I'm saying, it is happening. I mean, we saw the whole protest with George Floyd in US. It's unprecedented what happened. So I think if you take this whole fraying of democracy and co-opting it too far, then there are safety mechanisms still exist. And also, I mean, the whole fact is that we need to sometimes brush it up and pump it up, those safety mechanisms, and keep it oiled, and keep that in our eyesight, in our radar. So young people are the best conduit, the best ambassadors for that. And it's your life, it's your world, it's your generation which is going to inherit, and you're going to be the leaders of tomorrow. So I think across the world, democracy is shaken up a little bit here and there. So for fairness and justice, I think we need to remind ourselves every day that we need to protect it.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Krish, for those words. And I think they are going to be a great motivation to everyone who's been listening in, because one of the things that, on previous dialogues and previous conversations I've had with some of them here, there's this sense of helplessness that some of them feel at times, right? And what you said right now in terms of them really being able to make that change and protecting our democracy, making sure that our democracy is true to what a democracy should be and ought to be. It's really for them, and it's for them to do what they can. All of us also to reach a place where we can have a fairer world. So thank you so much, Trish, for this entire conversation. I think right throughout there's a tremendous amount of value that I'm sure that everyone has received from what you had to say and the perspectives that you brought to this conversation. To everyone else, this brings us to the end of the second FAIR dialogue, but we do have the third coming up next Sunday. So join us next week on Sunday, the 26th of July, from 11:30 a.m. onwards for the next FAIR dialogue with Miss Kamla Basin. For the few of you who may not know her, I urge you to learn more about her and be as enamored with her as we are. So tune in next week. Until then, Krish, thank you so much for your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.